As a Willbender, are you getting tired of getting out-sustained by other classes in Guild Wars 2? Are you feeling helpless in outnumbered situations? Or do you feel unhappy because some builds you just can't trade with as a Willbender? Well, no worries, because I have the solution and the right build for you. And this is the Celestial Willbender, or shall I say the BOONBENDER build. And it works because of the synergy between your gear, your traits, and the rotation that we use, which is both your offensive and defensive rotation, but it procs you a constant supply of boons, most importantly, regeneration and alacrity, which not only directly contributes to your sustain, but it also keeps your high impact skills off cooldown, so you can use it when you need it the most. In addition to your sustain, it also provides a high output of impressive power and condition pressure, which will surprise your opponents because they're not going to expect that kind of pressure. So be sure to listen to my must-know mechanics and rotation section of this video, where I'll be going over some must-know mechanics for the Willbender class, as well as listen to my whole how to use rotation section, where you'll learn how to use the offensive and defensive rotation to proc these really important boons that will keep you alive. Otherwise, even if you copy my gear and traits, you may be unable to replicate the results. So make sure to review those sections. Okay, let's take a look at the gear now. I recorded all the footage using exotic armor, but what I am using is I'm using exotic armor with the rune of the adventurer. So I've tested a few different rune types. Adventurer, I like it more because whenever I use a heal skill every 20 seconds, I get an extra dodge. Plus, the rune gives me power and condition damage, which is what I need because, as you're going to see, a lot of the traits I'm using is defensive, and Celestial is kind of a defensive armor set. So you need some sort of aggressive offensive rune, and that's why the one that I picked was Adventurer. Another option, if you don't like the Adventurer rune, is Balthazar for the extra burning damage. However, you won't get that extra utility of an extra dodge if you were to use Balthazar runes, but you will see an increase in health, which also helps. So either one works, or any other power or all stats rune would also be fine with this build. But my recommendation is to go with something that is more offensive. For trinkets, I'm also using a mixture here. I have dragon stats here for my backpack. I have celestial accessories and one celestial ring, and I have a marauder amulet, and I am using a berserker ring. And the whole point of having these kind of stats is because I want to get my power over 2000 when I'm using my power set, which is scepter and sword, and I want to be able to get over 1000 for condition damage when I switch to my condition damage set, and I'll explain that in a second. So I'm using scepter and sword because part of my rotation is to immobilize so I can land my whirling light. So because I'm switching weapons constantly, I want to do more power damage when I'm in scepter sword, and when I switch to my condition weapon set, I want to do more condition damage when I switch to this set. So for my power set, I'm using Sigil of Battle because I'm switching back and forth between these weapons quite a bit. So I am using Sigil of Battle so I can get some extra stacks of damage when I switch over to Scepter, because Scepter doesn't do a whole lot of damage. I do recommend you use consistent stats for your weapons. This is just what I had, so I'm using what I've got. And I'm using a offhand sword with a superior sigil of rage, because as soon as I crit, I'll be able to burst them quickly with quickness. For my second set, I'm using Sword Torch, and the whole point of this set is for me to get close to them using my Sword 2 and be able to load them up with burn damage with Torch 4. And if I'm within my symbol, I'm also going to use my Whirling Light, which will be about 10 seconds with the Alacrity proc that you're constantly going to be getting with this build. Okay, let's move over to the traits. For the traits, I'm using mostly defensive traits, so I'm using my Valor for meditation. So I have Smiter's Boon to cure conditions and to make my heal slightly better, especially if I don't proc the secondary effect. I can still get something out of my heal. I'm using Strength in Numbers to get additional toughness, and because I am using 1, 2, 3 meditations, I'm using Monk's Focus. For virtues, it's more or less the same. I'm using Unscathed Contender because it's the best of the 3, and I'm using Absolute Resolve because when you're up close trading with your enemies, what you're gonna find is you're gonna eat a lot of condies, and your Virtue 2 is going to be really important because it's an ammunition, it gives you heal, it's going to set up your alacrity, rotation, and it's going to be able to cure 3 conditions and remove immobilize. So it's a very important skill, and Absolute Resolve just makes it better. Lastly, I'm using Indomitable Courage because you need 3 stun breaks to play Guardian in general. Willbender is no different. So since I'm not using Stand Your Ground and I'm taking Whirling Light instead, I need to get my 3rd stun break somewhere. So I'm using Crashing Courage. For stun breaks, I'll also have Judge's Intervention, and I'll also have Contemplation of Purity. What would make this build even better is if you use Permeating Wrath. However, I feel it's too risky because being in World versus World with 2 stun breaks, it's just not enough. So in my last trait line, I'm using Willbender, I'm using Power for Power, I'm using Restorative Virtues, which triggers my Alacrity as soon as I use Flooring Reserve, and I'm using Phoenix Protocol because this ties into my rotation, which I'm going to be using to proc Phoenix Protocol. If you've also noticed, Phoenix Protocol has no cooldown, which means the better you do this rotation, the more alacrity and regeneration you can do. Obviously, it's gonna vary with the opponents you fight, but in most situations, if you get outnumbered, you'll be able to proc this quite a bit. So, all right, let's get into the mechanics, and then I'll get into how to use the rotation. Okay, let's go over some need-to-know mechanics that you must know about Willbender in general, but you'll definitely need to know it to play this build. So first things first, the number one thing you need to know about Willbender is the other Guardian specs have passive effects until you use the virtues. Willbender is the opposite. You gain your passive effects after using a virtue. So for example, if I am to use Rushing Justice, I have about, I think it's about 6 seconds, which I can proc my passives within those 6 seconds. If I wanted to proc my Flowing Resolve for regeneration and alacrity, I have about 8 seconds to proc it. So what that means is Willbender doesn't have passives until after they use their virtues. And after using your virtues, you only have a few seconds to proc your passive effects. So this class really benefits from fast hitting abilities. That is why I've taken Whirling Light, I've taken Scepter Swords, and I've taken Sword and Torch because these items, these moves, hit really fast. So this has very good synergy with this build, which will help us proc Phoenix Protocol as often as we can. Now, the second piece to keep in mind too is your virtues actually override one another. So with most Willbenders I see in World vs. World, they just spam their virtues, which is fine if you're only using your virtues for closing the gap and being able to get a hit. However, if for this build, we have to be a little bit more intentional in our build. So let me explain what that means. So if I want to proc extra burn damage, what I would do is I would use my F1 and then hit the target as many times as possible. If I wanted to proc my regenerative abilities, I'm going to use F2 and hit my target as much as possible. Or if I wanted to trade blows, I would use F3, so I proc some more sustain and some more boons. So the important thing is not to use my F1 and then immediately override it with F2 and then override it with F3, because as you can see, they replace each other. And that's not going to be what you're looking for, because in order for us to proc Phoenix Protocol, and I'll show you how to proc it, you have to be able to hit them as many times as you can within that 8-second window. But because we have an ammunition for F2, we can use it for up to 16 seconds. So we have 16 seconds to hit them as many times as possible in order for us to proc this. And I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, so first thing you need to know is Whirling Light is a combo whirl finisher. So you can actually use this on top of your symbols, and you can also clear conditions when you do that. So it's very effective whether you want to use that offensively or defensively. And what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to use this to your advantage to get as much hits as possible while you have your F2 available. So for example, so this tends to work better when you have multiple targets, because when you have multiple targets, you get more hits. So let me give you an example. So what I can do is I can precast my symbol, pour it in, use my dash, use my flames, and I'm barely trying. And I have 22 seconds of alacrity, and I have regeneration as well. So that comes from using my flowing resolve and then using as many fast hitting abilities as possible within the 8 seconds. So okay, so I think that's a good segue for us to move now into how to perform the rotations to do damage and how to sustain. So the first things first, it's much easier to execute that permanent alacrity or permanent boon generation if we were to just use it on a bunch of dummies standing still. So this build reigns supreme in PvE because those guys don't dodge. But against human players, you got to do some setup. And let me walk you through how I do that setup. So I always start the fight in my power weapons. I stand about a distance of 1200. The F1 passive kind of pales in comparison to my F2 and F3 passives after I use them. So I generally just use my F1 just to do some damage. So the problem is your F1 is very telegraphed. So I use Judge's Intervention to help hide the move so it lands. So what I do is I precast my F1 and I use Judge's Intervention to land. 5 to immobilize, 4 to do damage, 3 to immobilize, then I drop a symbol, switch to sword, and I use Whirling Light, throw a torch for him, and then I burn him. So that's the combo, if they don't move. However, what I want to do is I want to tie that combo with my F2. So depending on how the target, if the target is not standing still, most likely after I use my F1, I'm gonna have to use my F2 at some point to either close the distance or be able to proc my permanent alacrity. So what I'm going to do in actuality is pretend this target moves. I'm going to use my F1, I'm going to teleport in, 5 to immobilize, use my dash, immobilize, symbol, and then use my flame, toss the torch. And as you can see, I was generating alacrity almost the whole time. So with a single target, there is a limitation to how much alacrity you can proc because you're hitting a single target. That's why this build scales when you're in outnumbered situations. So if I wanted to fight a group of people, I can do the same thing. Here we go. Precast. Hang on, just gotta think about what I gotta do. All right, so precast, dash. Takes a little getting used to. Of course, your opponents will never be standing still, but the goal is to land as many fast hitting abilities as you can, so you can continue proccing Phoenix Protocol. And this is how you'll keep your sustain up, it'll help keep your DPS up, and it'll help keep everything up so you can fight longer and within the battle. Lastly, I promised some of the audience I'll go over the PvP variant. The PvP variant, you know, it's a little tough because you don't have celestial stats in PvP. However, I've done some light testing, and what I think works is the Wizard Amulet, because the other amulet options leave you with too little vitality, and I don't think you're going to be able to survive with that kind of vitality. So I went with Wizard Amulet and I went with Adventurer Runes. Of course, you can also use Balthazar. However, this is what I felt worked for me when I did a few tests on unranked PvP. So, you know, there you go. This is the Celestial BOONBENDER build, and I will put on some gameplay.